Have you ever wondered why the very strength you're so proud of feels so heavy? Why being the one who always holds everything together, who never breaks, who never shows weakness, starts to feel less like power and more like prison? We live in a world that worships resilience, applauds the ones who stand tall when life tries to knock them down, and calls it courage when someone never lets their tears be seen. But in the silence of your own mind, when no one is watching, do you ever feel the cracks forming? Do you ever feel like your strength is not saving you, but silently consuming you? Because strength, true strength, was never meant to mean never bending, never resting, never feeling. Yet somewhere along the way we confused resilience with suppression and courage with silence. And so, you carry the weight of the world, not realizing that the person you're betraying most is yourself. So let me ask you this: what if your greatest act of strength is not in being unshakable, but in finally allowing yourself to be human? We live in a society that confuses true resilience with emotional suppression. From the time we are children, we are taught that tears are signs of weakness, that vulnerability is something to be ashamed of, that those who bend under pressure are somehow inferior to those who never let anything touch them. This conditioning doesn't come from malice. It comes from a misunderstanding of what strength actually is. Parents tell their children to be strong when they cry. Leaders preach about toughness. Media glorifies heroes who never falter, and over time we internalize this message as truth. We begin to equate strength with silence, endurance with worth, and suffering with nobility. The misconception is not just cultural. It becomes deeply personal. We wear strength like armor, not realizing that the same shield that protects us from judgment is also what keeps love, compassion, and connection from reaching us. The conflict emerges when the image we project collides with the reality we feel. Outwardly, we look unshakable. Inwardly, we feel unseen, unheard, and more fragile than we dare to admit. Psychologically, this misunderstanding is devastating. Suppressing emotions is not neutral. It has consequences that ripple through every corner of life. Modern psychology has shown that the human mind does not erase feelings we choose to ignore. Instead, it buries them. These buried emotions do not disappear. They ferment. They transform into stress that lingers in the body, into an emptiness that no achievement or applause can fill. The more we pretend we are fine, the more the subconscious collects evidence that we are not. Over time, the pressure grows unbearable, but we continue to smile, continue to say, "I'm okay," because the world has rewarded us for this mask. The conflict intensifies when the body starts to rebel, when exhaustion becomes chronic, when irritability replaces peace, when depression begins to whisper that maybe life is not as strong as we thought. By trying to embody a false image of invulnerability, we weaken the very core of our being. Philosophically, the conflict is even older. Machiavelli once wrote that people judge more by appearances than by reality, because everyone sees what you seem to be, but few truly know who you are. This simple observation explains so much of the burden carried by those who strive to be strong. The world celebrates the surface, the mask, the posture of power, so naturally we craft our identities around that expectation, but in doing so, we betray ourselves. True resilience has never been about looking unbroken. It has always been about the courage to remain whole, despite breaking. Yet because appearances earn approval faster than authenticity, people often choose the mask. This is why someone may be praised as a pillar of strength, while secretly battling loneliness, grief, or despair that no one else sees. The conflict lies in that double life: the surface reality people consume, and the hidden truth that slowly eats away at the soul. And because few people dare to question this performance, the cycle repeats endlessly, generation after generation, until strength itself becomes distorted into something unrecognizable. The misconception thrives because it is convenient for others. When someone always appears strong, it absolves those around them from responsibility. If you are the friend who never complains, the sibling who never breaks down, the leader who never falters, then others quietly take comfort in your resilience. They lean on you without hesitation because you seem unshakable, but this dynamic, while flattering on the surface, becomes a prison. And because you seem unshakable, people stop asking if you're okay. They stop checking in, because your identity has convinced them you don't need it. This is how strength becomes isolation. The strong one becomes the invisible one. Everyone assumes you're fine, so no one bothers to look deeper. The very image of resilience that wins you admiration also robs you of intimacy, of support, of the shared humanity that reminds us we're not alone. It's a cruel paradox. The stronger you appear, the less likely others are to recognize when you're hurting. What makes this cycle so dangerous is how it changes the way we see ourselves. Over time, the performance of strength becomes not just a mask, but an identity. You stop telling yourself that you're pretending, and you begin to believe that to show any weakness would be a betrayal of who you are. The voice in your head says, you can't cry, you can't rest, you can't ask for help. And so, even in your weakest moments, you fight to appear invincible. But here's the paradox. The very act of denying your weakness magnifies it. Suppression turns natural human emotions into chronic suffering. Instead of moving through sadness, you trap it inside. Instead of releasing anger, you convert it into shame. Instead of admitting fear, you carry it like a silent weight. And the longer this continues, the more distant you feel from your own humanity. It's not just about being strong anymore. It's about refusing to allow yourself to be real. Richard, this internal battle creates a dangerous form of self-alienation. You begin to live as two different people, the one the world sees and the one you actually are. The version others see is always composed, competent, and calm. The version you are inside may be exhausted, uncertain, and longing for release. When these two realities clash, it creates cognitive dissonance, a deep psychological tension that erodes mental stability. You start to feel fraudulent, like a stranger in your own life. Sometimes this fracture is so severe that even when people offer genuine care, you don't know how to accept it. The identity of strength has become so entrenched that vulnerability feels impossible. And because you cannot reconcile these two selves, you either isolate further or collapse entirely. Both paths are destructive. This is the silent cost of the misconception. The illusion of strength robs you of the freedom to live as one whole, integrated human being. At its core, the conflict is not about strength at all. It is about misunderstanding the role of pain in human life. Pain was never meant to be erased. It was meant to be experienced, processed, and transformed. To deny it is to deny one of the most essential teachers of existence. When we numb our suffering, we also numb our joy. When we bury our grief, we bury our capacity for love. When we silence our vulnerability, we silence our humanity. Yet society tells us otherwise, that only the unbreakable survive, that emotions are distractions, that stoicism is the path to respect. And so we grow up mistaking numbness for courage, isolation for independence, hardness for power. The conflict is that the very practices meant to protect us from pain are what amplify it, trapping us in cycles of exhaustion and disconnection. We don't realize that the strength we worship is not strength at all. It is fear wearing the mask of control. True resilience was never about never falling. It was always about finding the courage to rise again and again, without shame. You know the feeling of being the strong one, because it becomes a role you never auditioned for but somehow inherited. At first it feels noble. You're the dependable one, the person others look up to, the shoulder that everyone leans on. Friends and family call when they are falling apart, and you are proud to be the one who listens, comforts, and steadies them. But slowly you notice a pattern. You are always the one listening, and rarely the one being heard. You are the one lifting others. But when your arms grow tired, no one seems to notice. You start to wonder if people see you at all, or if they only see the version of you that makes their world easier. Deep down, you feel a quiet resentment, not because you don't love helping, but because somewhere along the way, you forgot what it feels like to be helped. There are nights when you collapse into bed not from physical exhaustion, but from carrying an emotional weight no one else knows about. You replay conversations where you smiled and said you were fine, even though you weren't. You think about the moments you wanted to scream, cry, or admit that you were falling apart, but the words died before they reached your lips. You fear what would happen if people saw you break. Would they think less of you? Or worse, would they abandon you? So you keep playing the part. You laugh at jokes when your heart is heavy. You offer advice when your own mind is in chaos. You build walls not because you don't want connection, but because you're terrified of what would happen if someone actually saw behind them. Sometimes, The most painful part isn't the burden itself, but the silence around it. People don't ask if you're okay anymore because they assume you always are. They don't check in, not out of cruelty, but because you've trained them to believe you're invincible. And in that absence of concern, you start to feel invisible. The strength you thought would make you respected has now made you untouchable. You sit in rooms full of people who admire you, yet feel utterly alone. It's the kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being isolated, but from being misunderstood. You want someone to see through the facade, to recognize the fatigue in your eyes, to say, "You don't always have to be strong." But the more you maintain the mask, the less likely anyone is to question it, and the cycle continues. Think about those moments when life hits hardest. Loss, heartbreak, failure, and you realize that everyone assumes you'll bounce back without issue. They tell you, "You're strong, you'll get through this," as though strength cancels out suffering. But those words, while meant as encouragement, sting in ways you cannot explain. Because sometimes you don't want to be strong. Sometimes you want to fall apart in someone's arms, to feel the comfort of knowing you don't have to hold everything together. Yet the reputation of strength has become a cage. You cannot fall apart without feeling like you're betraying the image others rely on. And so you swallow the grief, you bury the pain, you endure in silence, all while appearing fine to the outside world. It is a lonely contradiction, being celebrated for something that secretly suffocates you. There are also the small, daily betrayals you commit against yourself in the name of strength. You don't ask for help carrying groceries because you don't want to appear weak. You don't cancel plans when you're drained because you don't want to let people down. You don't admit you're struggling at work because you don't want to be seen as incapable. These little sacrifices pile up until one day you realize you're no longer living authentically. You're living for the image of resilience you've created. You've become a caretaker of everyone else's needs while abandoning your own. And though people admire your strength, you feel hollow inside, like a beautiful house that no one has bothered to furnish. You keep giving, but there's nothing left for you. And then there are the rare moments of honesty, the cracks that slip through despite your best efforts. Maybe you cry quietly in the shower so no one will hear. Maybe you drive alone and scream into the steering wheel because the silence is unbearable. Maybe you write out words you'd never say aloud, just to feel some release. In those moments you catch a glimpse of the person beneath the armor, the one who longs to be seen in all their complexity. Not just the strong one, but the vulnerable one, the tired one, the deeply human one. But almost immediately you patch up the crack, wipe away the tears, and re-enter the world with the mask firmly back in place. And every time you do, you feel a little more distant from yourself. Over time, this distance becomes a kind of quiet grief. It's the grief of realizing that people know your strength, but not your soul. That they see your resilience, but not your pain. It's the grief of realizing that you've spent so much energy holding everyone else together that no one ever learned how to hold you. You wonder what would happen if you stopped performing, if you let the mask drop and showed the world the real you. Would they stay? Or would they leave? This fear keeps you trapped, replaying the same role in a play you no longer want to be in. And yet, beneath it all, a voice whispers that maybe true strength was never about being the strong one for everyone else. Maybe it was always about having the courage to finally be honest with yourself. There comes a moment when the weight of pretending grows heavier than the fear of being seen. At first it's subtle, a sigh that escapes in the quiet, a tear that surprises you when you thought you were numb, a sudden longing for someone to simply notice your silence. These cracks feel dangerous because they threaten the image you've worked so hard to maintain, but they are also sacred. They are the beginnings of awakening. They remind you that your humanity has been waiting patiently beneath the mask of strength. The truth emerges like light through a narrow window, insisting that there is more to life than the performance of being unbreakable. You realize that being strong all the time hasn't preserved you, it has slowly dismantled you. And in that awareness you discover a strange kind of hope. Maybe it's not too late to choose differently. Maybe it's not too late to choose differently. The awakening begins when you stop seeing vulnerability as a threat and start seeing it as a doorway. For so long you have believed that to cry, to admit fear, to show uncertainty would strip you of dignity. But the awakening teaches you that dignity is not in hiding your scars, it is in honoring them. Scars tell the story of survival, They are proof that you lived, that you felt, that you endured. And when you finally let yourself sit with them without shame, something shifts. You stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start whispering, "What has life been trying to teach me through this pain?" This reframing is where strength transforms. It ceases to be about endurance and begins to be about wisdom. In solitude, the awakening deepens. Silence, which once felt suffocating, begins to reveal its beauty. You notice how stillness carries truths you never had time to hear. In the quiet, you discover the exhaustion you denied, the dreams you postponed, the feelings you buried. At first, this confrontation feels unbearable, like being flooded by everything you've avoided. But slowly, the flood becomes a cleansing. The silence stops being empty and becomes a sanctuary, a place where you can finally breathe without performance. For the first time, you sit with yourself without judgment, and in that acceptance, you recognize that your worth has never depended on being flawless. It has always existed, even in the most fragile corners of your being. The awakening also reshapes your understanding of connection. You begin to see that real relationships are not built on perfection, but on authenticity. For years you feared that if others saw your pain, they would withdraw. But the awakening reveals the opposite. It is in vulnerability that intimacy is born. When you let someone see your tears, you invite them closer. When you admit your struggles, you create space for them to do the same. The performance of strength creates admiration, but the expression of truth creates love. And so you start to test it. Small admissions of how tired you are, quiet acknowledgments of the weight you've been carrying. To your surprise, some people don't turn away. They lean in. They see you, not just the mask, but the person beneath it. And in those moments you realize that being human has given you more connection than being strong ever did. Awakening also means redefining what strength truly is. It is no longer the rigid stance of someone who never breaks. It is the fluid resilience of someone who allows themselves to bend. It is the courage to face fear without pretending it doesn't exist. It is the softness of compassion, both for others and for yourself. You learn that the most powerful people are not those who never stumble, but those who stumble and rise with humility. You begin to value gentleness as much as grit, rest as much as effort, honesty as much as perseverance. Strength stops being about domination, over circumstances, over emotions, over yourself, and becomes about harmony. You are not here to conquer life. You are here to walk with it. The imagery of light becomes important in this stage. You start to notice how even the smallest crack lets sunlight through, how darkness itself makes illumination meaningful. Your pain, once a source of shame, now becomes the crack through which your soul breathes. You realize that light doesn't come from denying darkness, but from carrying it with grace. Your tears glisten like proof that you are alive, not proof that you are broken. The scars you tried to hide now shine like constellations mapping your survival. And in these realizations, you begin to love yourself not in spite of your weakness, but because of the fullness of who you are. The awakening is not about becoming someone new. It is about remembering the self you abandoned in your pursuit of appearing invincible. Ultimately, the awakening calls you home to yourself. It whispers that you are allowed to rest, to collapse, to rebuild. It reminds you that your worth was never in your strength alone, but in your humanity as a whole. You look back at the years you spent hiding, and instead of regret, you feel gratitude for finally arriving here, at this threshold of truth. The world may still ask you to perform, to smile, to appear unshakable, but something inside you has shifted. You know now that the most radical act of strength is not in never breaking. It is in allowing yourself to break, to heal, and to rise again with honesty. The awakening is not dramatic, not loud, not a sudden explosion of clarity. It is gentle, like dawn breaking after a long night, a quiet assurance that you no longer need to live divided. You are whole, even with your wounds. You are strong, even when you rest. You are free, finally, to be real. The end of this journey is not about abandoning strength, but about redefining it. For so long you may have believed that life demanded a constant performance of toughness, that the world would only value you if you never faltered. But as you've walked through the silence, the tears, and the realization of your own humanity, you've discovered something far more profound. The strength you once wore like armor was never the real thing. It was a costume stitched together by fear of judgment and desire for acceptance. Now, standing here with a deeper awareness, you understand that the true revolution is not about how unshakable you appear on the outside, but about how deeply you allow yourself to be real on the inside. The applause of the world fades quickly. The peace of being whole lasts forever. When you let go of the need to be invincible, you reclaim something that had been lost, the freedom to live authentically. You no longer have to hide your trembling hands, your sleepless nights, your whispered doubts. You begin to see that every human carries these things, yet few have the courage to admit them. By daring to be honest about your own fragility, you free yourself from the exhausting cycle of proving, performing, and pretend. This is not weakness, it is liberation. For the first time, you step into a life that belongs to you, not to the expectations of others. And in that authenticity, you find a power that no mask could ever provide. This is the kind of strength that builds, not destroys. The deeper you reflect, the clearer it becomes that the real enemy was never the hardships of life, but the pressure to face them alone. Every storm you've survived, every loss you've endured, every heartbreak you've carried, none of these defined your failure. What threatened you most was the belief that you had to endure them silently, without support, without release. But the conclusion you arrive at now is different. You were never meant to carry life alone. Connection, vulnerability, and shared humanity are not luxuries. They are necessities. To admit you cannot always be strong is not a betrayal of your character, but an honoring of your truth. You understand now that asking for help is not a sign of weakness. It is the ultimate gesture of courage. A recognition that no one was ever designed to endure the weight of existence without others. This shift in perspective ripples into every part of your being. You begin to notice that when you stop hiding your scars, others feel braver about revealing theirs. When you speak honestly about your struggles, people don't turn away, they lean closer. Suddenly, the walls that once isolated you begin to dissolve, and in their place, bridges form. You start experiencing relationships in a way you never thought possible, rooted not in admiration for your strength, but in respect for your honesty. The performance of perfection kept people at a distance, but the admission of truth draws them near. This is the quiet miracle of transformation. When you choose authenticity, you not only free yourself, but invite others into freedom too. Strength was never meant to isolate. It was meant to connect. With this awakening, you no longer feel the need to prove your worth through relentless endurance. You realize that life is not a competition to see who can suffer in silence the longest. It is not about being the one who never bends or breaks. It is about learning how to bend without shattering, how to break and still rebuild, how to rest without shame. True strength is not a rigid posture, but a fluid dance with reality. It honors both light and shadow, both joy and sorrow. You begin to see your life as a canvas where both colors, the bright and the dark, paint the whole picture. Without the shadows, the light loses its depth. Without the vulnerability, the strength loses its soul. And so you embrace it all, no longer resisting the ebb and flow of being human. And finally, you come to understand that the revolution you've been searching for was never outside of you. It was always within. It is not in earning louder applause, collecting more validation, or building higher walls of toughness. It is in the quiet, almost invisible act of turning inward and saying, "I am enough as I am." This simple declaration dismantles years of conditioning, years of performing, years of exhaustion. It is a return to the essence of being alive. The revolution is not about conquering the world, but about reclaiming yourself from the lies that told you strength meant never breaking. It is about becoming whole again. So as you move forward, let the world keep its shallow definitions of strength. You know now that the deepest power lies not in never falling, but in rising, each time with greater compassion. This is the strength that does not destroy. It rebuilds, it connects, it frees.